Hallo Freunde, äh, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. Es ist spät, 10 Uhr, and no red today. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Multiple of us have remarked upon that already this morning. So apparently, people really took into the notion that we're basically starting to wrap up 8, and now this group is thinking about the future, while the people actually writing code are thinking about the present. So first up is a brand new issue, but the first one tagged for .NET 9, 89161 HTTP method from string.
So HTTP method has a bunch of singleton properties for get, put, post, delete, etc. It also has a constructor that instantiates a new instance of the HTTP method, and all HTTP method is a strongly typed wrapper around a string. But for scenarios where you're doing a proxy or where you have like a wrapper class, like some other kind of network client that wraps an HTTP client, and you might be accepting a string verb, you often see people doing new HTTP method with the get or put or post, like the variable storing it, which is an unnecessary allocation, or they realize that and then they write their own switch statement or their own collection or whatever to do the lookup. My proposal here is we just simplify that and add a new method that basically gives you back the singletons if it can, or just delegates to the constructor if it can't. This is also a little bit more future-proof than the singletons because it means that like several times in recent releases, we've added yet another singleton. Like I think we recently added patch, and we can update the from or the parse whatever method when we do that. And if someone's using it, they'll just sort of get that for free. I don't really care what the method is called. There are a variety of names we could have for it. It could be from, parse, get, whatever. It's a typical factory method. I had suggested string, but someone suggested read-only span char, which I think is perfectly fine. And then the question would just be, are we okay with just having read-only span char, which I personally am, or do we feel like we still need to have another overload that takes a string? So yeah, that's what this is. One note on the read-only span char thing. The HTTP method does wrap a string. So if we don't know what the thing is, even if it's passed in as a string, but if we take it as a read-only span char, we will have to toString it in the case where we're storing it into the HTTP method instance and not. But that's a very rare case because you would expect the majority case to be one of the known verbs.
Right. So this makes me wonder if it should just be, if it should instead be like try parse, and the default is false, and so that's telling you I can get one of these things without, like, I know about this, and here's the answer. And in the false, you get to decide: are you really okay with making up your own HTTP method?
So is this why you were talking about intercepting new when I joined the call before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because effectively, unless someone actually cares about reference equality, you just want everyone doing new HTTP method to get one of the singletons.
Yeah, so regarding the try parse, I suspect that you probably care about a very specific set of verbs in that case. And if we add some new verb foo in the future, you probably don't know how to handle that in your code. So you probably still wanted that to fail regardless. So I imagine that for people who want to try parse like stuff, they're already going to have to use a switch statement.
Or if they don't, their fallback when try parse returns false is to just do new HTTP method.
Yeah, which we could just do.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of the question here of, so part of it comes from if it's dropped to Rosh char, right? Because if you call parse from whatever and you give it a string, but the string gets turned into Rosh char, then we need to turn it back into a string, and since we can't get the string back out, now we toString it and make a copy of it, and it's one of the cases where spanifying the input if it does follow up work in the default case, is worse than not spanifying the method.
Right.
So that would be a good argument for having both overloads.
Or just having the string. But
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
We could have both. I wouldn't care. I mean, the 99.99999% case is it's going to be one of the known verbs.
Yeah, I mean, it just leaves me with, you know, should it supposed to do, should it do any trimming to be like, you sliced this wrong? Should it do case normalization? Should it do like?
So case normalization, I think we decided yes, it should do. The trimming, I don't have a strong opinion.
It's just like, yeah,
It doesn't do trimming today.
It does not. The constructor does not.
Right, but and I think that
also, the constructor also doesn't do case normalization. So I think the question, like, I think basically we're saying this method is a factory that can choose to give you back something that is mapped, but not necessarily exactly what you gave it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, if we think that it's basically only going to be called by people who correctly have the verb and that they're going to correctly get the thing, then the Roshchar version seems fine. If there's concern of risk of caring about people, sorry, if there's care for people who are trying to parse the header themselves and had an off by one and grabbed GET space, then the default, well, I guess, sorry, the default becomes weird if they actually get like a HTTP4 verb and we have to go make it, where that's when you get the string turns into Roshchar, turns back into string. So I don't know, maybe it's just fine as is.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about stripping spaces because like that's already the case today. If somebody calls substring incorrectly and then calls a constructor, like we're going to keep the space in there. So we're not introducing a mode of failure where one previously didn't exist.
Fair enough. Yeah, my initial reaction of looking at what it's supposed to do was, should it be called parse, but I feel like once it's returning things it doesn't know, that's more from than parse. So
Well, our normal naming is to use verbs, and from is not a verb.
I think parse is fine. Especially if we're not going to just store the exact thing you gave us. If we're going to case normalize it, or maybe trim or whatever.
If we called it parse, then trimming should be okay.
Yeah.
So call it parse, allow trimming, and perform case normalization for the purpose of lookup.
Yeah.
And then define whatever the appropriate behavior is if you pass it something that it doesn't know, like whether it preserves case, whether it continues to trim, whatever you want.
Yeah, I think if it gives you something you don't know, we probably just use the original string. But again, I think it almost will never matter.
Sorry. So HTTP client does trim and normalize case when you like use the normal constructor and you like make requests.
Yeah, it does its own normalization.
And that includes trimming.
Yes, I'll double check.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, but yeah, I generally agree. Like, if there's no observable difference in like the requests that are generated for the method, then it should be the same.
I love that the equals method and the equality operator on HTTP method do different things. Oh no, there we go. There is the call to normalize.
It doesn't trim. It does do case sensitivity or case insensitivity.
Yeah, so I just leave it at that. Do the case normalization and don't trim.
I mean, I guess one consequence of this is that HTTP method dot parse whatever dot method might return different things on different runtimes. Maybe that's okay.
Can you elaborate?
So if in .NET 9 we introduce a new verb foo, and it gets properly, like we actually have a property corresponding to foo, like capital FOO. If you do HTTP method dot parse of lowercase foo dot method on .NET 8, it will return lowercase foo. On .NET 9, it returns uppercase foo.
Right.
Maybe that's okay.
I mean, yeah, if HTTP verbs have hitherto always been all caps is the correct form of it. Once it's doing case normalization, I assume it has to do that by actually doing a copy this as uppercase, and then seems like two-stringing that is just as easy and will probably lead to better results. Unless it's gonna do ignore case comparison, in which case,
Yeah, this only matters if you're pulling the string back out of it. If you're doing an equality check on the instance itself, it's all going to succeed. Oh well.
Yeah, double check me. Like everyone agrees. Like Stefan, I think in particular, I'm looking at you. That the 10 or so verbs that we know about it, like that is the 99.9999999% case, right?
Stefan is muted. But
sorry, yeah, no, I thought I wasn't muted. Yeah, I think you've got it. The in ASP.NET we often just deal with them as streams, but like we have map get, map post, map delete, map all that. I didn't see anything obviously missing.
Cool.
All right. Sweet.
All right. That is our first approved method for .NET 9. Add a warning for argument null exception, throw if null when passing a struct. 85154. Sounds like an analyzer. Oh, and it is.
Yeah, it's an analyzer. Basically, throw if null takes object. If you're passing something that's known to be a struct, it'll never be null because it's going to get boxed and it won't be null. So unless it's a nullable of T, if it's a struct, basically issue a diagnostic.
Yeah.
Sounds correct to me. Are there any other of these helpers that would matter? Because string is null or empty is string, so it can't get a struct.
I don't think so. We've got ones that do comparison, but when we talked about those, we basically explicitly said, well, if someone defines what null means for their comparison, then we shouldn't block it. And for object disposed exception, it's not relevant. So, yeah.
Okay. Category and level.
Category be like maintainability or reliability, whatever the closest one there is.
Like it's like correctness, but I don't know if we have a category for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, reliability makes sense to me, and it would be warning on by default.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I'd be fine. I wouldn't want to do error. I'd be fine for this one with warning since we know it's wrong. I'd also be okay with info.
I do kind of want it to be on by default because it's like, as a developer, you went out of your way to write this line of code, but it doesn't do what you think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think somebody pointed out the JIT will delete it, but a human looking at the line of code may wonder what it's actually doing.
Correct me if I'm wrong. If you forget this method, if you have a struct and you just say if s is null, C# will now issue a warning for that, right?
Yes.
So it makes sense to match that severity level.
So, by the way, what was the API argument? Null exception, null throw, null?
Yeah.
So, random question here. You said that it's you said that you don't want this to give you a warning if somebody passes a nullable of T, correct?
I feel like we shouldn't, but that would be misleading.
So, there is a
I mean, there's a perf issue to doing that, but
yeah, because I'm looking at right now the method only has an object overload and a void star overload. So if you give it a nullable of T, that nullable of T is going to get boxed.
right. If it's non-null, the value will get boxed.
Yes, but presumably if you're about to throw if it's null, you don't care about performance in that case.
Right. I mean, we could issue a different diagnostic in that case. I wouldn't want to use the same diagnostic ID. But we could have a
Sure.
we could have a performance diagnostic ID.
Yes, well, I was wondering if
I mean-
we should just add an overload that handles nullable of T.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Just add a throw if null for nullable of T.
It's reasonable. I can't think of any reason not to do that.
I don't think it would introduce overload resolution problems.
You wouldn't get, I mean, if you were in a generic context where you had a T, you wouldn't end up using the nullable of T overload, but it also, there's nothing we could do better there, short of making throw if null be generic, and we haven't done that for reasons.
Right.
Yeah, well, because if you're generic on nullable of T, then it would work.
You'd be generic on the T that is in the nullable of T.
Sorry, I mean, if you're in a generic method where if the T itself is a nullable of some other U.
Right. If it's an unconstrained T,
yeah,
it could still be a nullable of U, and it will use the object overload, not the nullable overload. But I don't know that matters. I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
I think adding one for nullable of T sounds reasonable. If we hit any issues with it, we can revisit. I think that one would be category performance level info.
Yeah. So did we just approve an API even though no one was asking for it?
I think so.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was gonna look up the Roslyn analyzer categories. Okay, so for non-nullable struct.
I mean, it does re-raise the question about should we be having a throw if null that's generic. We haven't for two reasons, semi-related reasons. One is there are still limitations today in the runtime in JIT where it won't get inlined for various reference types. And so for a method that's supposed to be really fast, you're incurring a method call and generic dictionary lookup. And then if it's not inlined, well, yeah, it might not get inlined, and if it's not inlined, there are more costs. That's basically the reason we haven't made it generic thus far. But that does raise the I guess there wouldn't be an issue if we were to add a generic throw-off null of t that took a t question mark, where t is a struct. That would not prevent us in the future from adding a throw-off null t that took just a t, right? Because those would not conflict. That would not be ambiguous.
I believe you're correct.
I also believe you're correct. It would confuse. It might confuse people if they were themselves in a generic, unconstrained method. If they watched the code and that it and the t ended up being a nullable of t, and then it jumped to the one that didn't say nullable of t, and it's like, well, that's the difference between generic and dynamic.
Yeah, if you were afraid of that, then I would say don't have the generic for the nullable of t. Just take throw of null of t argument, and that way it'll handle everything, including nullable of t.
Right, but we
and then
we
our
do
implementation
that,
will be if t is struct do nothing.
we have no. If we had a way to do this, well, I don't know. I mean, that's my hesitancy with this, with adding this nullable struct one is, if we go down this path, we might just want to revisit the previous decision and just add a generic one and basically make the current object one just a no-op. I mean, or not a no-op, but no one would ever use it unless you actually had something strongly typed to system.object. But we would need to revisit the previous issues, and I think we would still choose not to do it because it might not always get inlined.
Yeah, and even doing it for the nullable of t, like every time somebody calls it, the runtime has to go carve out another method that's now callable, because structs always get unique method entries. I mean, somebody could probably do something special and say that on this one it knows that the real t... No, because it needs to... Yeah, I mean, we could do something really weird and special and say that it ignores how much stack space is passed in because the boolean was the first value and that's all it cares about, but that feels icky.
I mean, we control the JIT, we control the trimmer, we can change the JIT and the trimmer, like it's work, but it's well within our ability to do that.
Yeah.
Like we could literally
that's what I'm saying.
tell the
Something
trimmer
evil
if you
could be
see
done.
a call, yeah. Like we could enlighten the trimmer to say if you see a call to this where t is a struct, like evaluate both arguments because the evaluation might have a side effect, and then throw the call out.
Putting force inline on a generic method, the runtime will still create the generic method stub, right? Like it'll still allocate the unique function entry point.
Yes. However, for when t is a reference type, there is some type of sharing that takes place.
Yeah, all reference t share the same function.
Yeah.
But the only reason we'd be doing this is for nullable structs. And so I feel that part of the reason why we didn't do it generic previously, it would be sort of the, I hear Jan Kodas in the back of my head saying, why are you exploding so many instantiations for a thing that doesn't need it?
Okay, so we don't make any API changes right now, and we have two different, an analyzer that can return one of two different results, reliability or perf.
Yep. I'll just be super clear. All right. So I think I'm happy with what it says there, and then, yeah, for deciding to make the method generic either over nullable of t or over all t's, that would probably be something that somebody would want to talk either with Jan or somebody who cares as much about not instantiating generic methods with types unnecessarily as Jan. And if we can fold it all down into
good.
one implementation for all the structs because we know it's special, then like great. Yeah, I don't think the only thing we could do for a fixer on this is for the we can do a fixer for the first one that deletes the line of code.
Right.
Do we care?
I don't particularly care.
Yeah.
I think it's fine without a fixer. Someone was trying to do something and it makes no sense. So maybe it's best to say reevaluate what you're doing and figure it out. I mean, it could be a simple mistake and like, oh, I didn't actually need to null check that, and so deleting it was valuable. But there's already a fixer, control X. So
yeah, I mean, really, it's so you could get the bulk. Like, oh, I did this 1,000 times, delete them all.
I hope you don't have this in bulk.
And then, yeah, maybe somewhere there's a fixer of like, delete this line of code, and we could just throw another diagnostic ID at it if anybody cares.
So let me make you sad right now. What happened? So we said, okay, if the input is a reference type, like we just let it go through. If the input is a non-nullable or a nullable struct type, then we do the things called out here. What if the input is T?
Unconstrained?
Yes.
We do nothing.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do a performance check on that.
I mean, the JIT's gonna do the right thing in the 99.999% case.
The runtime,
because throw if null takes an object.
Yeah, but it eliminates the box when it gets inlined.
If the JIT sees the call, so that was the comment up here. If the JIT sees a call and it knows it's a struct type, the JIT will see it's going to call a thing that it wants to inline. It passed a box to check if it was null, and it realizes those two operations cancel out, and then it just eliminates the call altogether. So right now, if you do it with a struct, the JIT says this is stupid and doesn't actually do anything. It's you've written a line of code that's the same as a comment, and
if that weren't the case, the balance for adding a generic overload would have been very different.
Okay, got it.
And then, yeah, so cool. Add support for AVX 512 VNNI hardware instructions 86849er.
I thought we were done with these.
Tanner?
We're never done. There's always more instructions.
Yeah.
So this one is a little bit of a weird one. So Intel shipped AVX Intel shipped AVX 512 VNNI first. And that is what's described here. So it supports 128, 256, and 512-bit instructions that do vector neural network interface functionality. They then realized that not all of their CPUs have AVX 512, but VNNI instructions are still very important for machine learning scenarios. So they later shipped AVX VNNI. We have already approved and shipped AVX VNNI. However, AVX 512 VNNI and AVX VNNI, you cannot guarantee that you will have one, the other, or both. So you actually need both. And so everything in AVX 512 VNNI.VL is a direct duplicate of what's in AVX VNNI. It's just the 128 and 256-bit functionality, but under a different CPU ID bit. that may or may not exist simultaneously. And then the ones below that are in the AVX512 VNNI class directly are the 512-bit versions of the instructions that we don't have any support anywhere for.
By we don't have support for it, you mean there's no equivalent intrinsic?
Yeah, there's
not like
no...
the collective .NET team has never seen a processor from Intel that actually had these instructions.
Correct on the first. It's
Okay.
It's that we don't have any corresponding functionality for them anywhere. But these are exactly matching the existing shape, name, and API surface. Just with the weird quirk that we've got both for 128 and 256, we have the same APIs in both AVX512 VNNI and AVX VNNI.
And I think what you said is that the people at Intel didn't decide to just publish it as a second schema using the exact same instruction encoding, that there's literally the same function has two different encodings if your processor supports
Correct.
both? Okay.
Correct, because one is using the legacy Vex, well, not legacy, but the standard Vex encoding, whereas the AVX512 ones are using the EVEX encoding, and they are tracked via very distinct CPU ID bits. So it's
Sure. I was just double checking that there wasn't anything easy in here that we just say like, yep, it might be one of these two, but they encode the same, so you don't care. They don't code differently, so obviously you need to tell us which one you wanted. Alright, so these are the only quote-unquote new ones, right?
yeah.
And these are just bigger size versions of ones that already exist?
Yep.
I see some ads and some ad saturates, and okay, on the proviso that all of the copy pasta is correct on this one. Seems good to me. Anybody else?
I'm looking for, is AVX512F an existing type?
Yeah. That's the foundational class. Source.net's broken right now.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the reference CS files right now. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, it's new in .NET 8, AVX512F, and it's the foundational base class of all other AVX512.
Yeah, it sounded familiar. I'm surprised email hasn't ingested a new catalog. But
Okay. Yeah, because it looks like we did the same thing for AVX512 BW. We followed the same pattern there. Got it. Cool. And look, we're using the same method names, all that good stuff. Multiply, wide name, and add. Yeah. Okay. So what is the difference here? Is it adjusting codes differently?
It's that it encodes differently. It's that there are two distinct CPU ID bits. So
Oh, got it. Okay.
normally, so normally with instructions there was the VEX encoding, and then those instructions were expanded up to also support the EVEX encoding, and so you're guaranteed to have VEX and EVEX at the same time. Because of how this particular feature shipped, you have you had only the EVEX encoding, and the VEX encoding was added later. But the VEX encoding does not require the EVEX encoding, and because the VEX encoding came later, the EVEX can exist without the VEX, or vice versa.
Yes, I see this all on Felix's website now. Okay. Got it. Cool. So it's the same instruction under two CPU ID bits with two different encodings.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Fun quirks.
Yeah, element looks like looks like there's also like a mask ability in one of them.
Yeah,
We
the
don't support
ebex in
masks,
general, we don't publicly expose masking. We implicitly in the JIT utilize masking in some scenarios. And that was what we had a review around like a month back now.
Got it. Neat.
Hey, it's the bug again. Are we ready to talk about warn when comparing spans to null again, or do we want to wait till Emo's here? Deferred to
I would
bigger.
probably want Emo to be here.
Yeah. Alright, collection of T, an observable collection of T, do not support ranges. 18087.
I think we need Eric here.
Do these mean ranges, or do these mean ranges? You think we need him because there would be implementation questions that change how we feel about the shape? Because
this has been around for 7 years, and he's been instrumental in it coming in and out of API review over that time.
fair enough. Obsolete or hide type info and get type info 53217. Oh, the type versus type info silliness.
I'm a little concerned at the concept of obsoleting it, only because I fear that might introduce a reasonable amount of unnecessary noise into people's code bases. I don't have a problem hiding it so they don't discover it anew.
Yeah, I'm generally not a fan of putting obsolete on a type. Because then any public method that accepted one, or property that has it as its property type, now has to virally carry forward the obsolete. Well, they have to carry the obsolete suppression. It's not super duper viral, but I wouldn't put it on the type, only on ways that you get one. So I would more like flip those two attributes. Or we can just DB never both of them.
You mean EB never the type itself?
Yeah, why not?
I don't think that would break anything.
So how do you get one?
A type info?
Yeah. Like, there's the introspection extensions get type info, but I feel like there's another entry point to getting it, but it may be on type info itself, which is why they didn't talk about it.
I mean, doesn't system.type subclass it? No, it's member info.
Type info derives type?
Yeah, I got it backward. Yeah, type info subclass is type.
Did we do that later as part of reunifying the universe? Because my recollection is we had type info as distinct from type as part of the netcore 1, some netcore 1 layering stuff. Like, we wanted to be able to talk about a type without loading all of reflection. And then later we built netcore 2 and undid a lot of things we did in netcore 1.
Yeah, netcore 2 is what introduced type info subclass as type.
Okay. Wow. Good job, brain. 7-year-old totally irrelevant fact. Yeah, so I mean, there must have been a way to get a type info.
Wasn't Silverlight the thing that kind of introduced this concept?
Was it?
Well, this says in net of Windows Store, but I swear there was like a Silverlight get type info extension method because we wanted to like prevent private reflection within Silverlight. So type info at one point only exposed like public members or something.
Like the emo catalog says net 4.5 was the first version, which seems more to align with we were doing this for net core. Because Silverlight would have been 2. Right? By .NET Framework 4, Silverlight was dead.
It was still around, but yeah.
Yeah. Because I remember working on a team that was using Silverlight, and then Silverlight died, and then we threw away the Silverlight version and just went with JavaScript. Oh, what web applications could have been? Yeah. So to the point at hand. I don't like obsoleting the type, because as I said, if somebody took it as a method parameter, they shouldn't have to go put suppress don't use an obsolete type, because they've already shipped the method. It's there. But taking all the places that you get a type info instead of a type and making them obsolete seems fine to me. Yeah, none of those are static. It's probably not the right get type info. No.
So if we just never the extension methods that give you a type info, can we get away with not doing anything to the type itself? Not obsoleting, not nevering it, nothing?
That means probably fine. To do nothing on the type.
Is that the only method on introspection extensions? It is. Okay. Yeah, I would vote for nevering either introspection extensions or get type info and leaving the type info class alone. Because the class itself doesn't seem to be hurting anything being there if no one uses it.
I don't know. I honestly don't know what happens if you never a type that has extension methods.
Sounds like a fun thing to experiment with. You could never both. Both introspection extensions and get type info. If you wanted.
Right. Because presumably nevering the extension method means it doesn't show up on the type, but I don't know that nevering the type will prevent the extension method from showing up on its target type.
Oh yeah, we should do whatever. Yeah, we should do whatever is needed to make the extension method not show up. That what I was kind of extrapolating from that was this extension method class is now effectively dead as well.
Right.
So there's no reason for it to appear anywhere.
So you don't think we want to obsolete introspection extensions get type info? You think we just want to EB never it?
I would EB never it, yeah.
Yep.
Because obsolete implies like you shouldn't be. It implies that there's something wrong with using it, or it's about to be removed, or something like that. Whereas like there's nothing wrong with using type info. It's just like why. And you might legitimately need to pass it to someone who accepts it.
Mm-hmm.
In YouTube chat, they're suggesting putting a dot comment on type info. Yeah, I'm looking at the remarks for it right now, and the remarks don't clearly call out that you shouldn't be using it. So that's probably something we can do at the same time.
Fair enough. Okay, copy the blob.
I swear type info like harkens back to the Silverlight days. I don't know why I think that.
I don't know, the docs say it's for Windows 8 X Store apps, but I really thought we did it for core. All right. Any other feedback? No, I guess.
Yeah, adding something to the remarks section seems like some pretty easy low-hanging fruit.
Boom. Add an analyzer warning of erroneous usage of max response headers length 75137.
Okay. Yeah, so we have this property, the max response header length on the socket attribute handler. It has an unfortunate property that its unit is in kilobytes, not bytes, which you can't tell from just looking at the name. So we've seen a few times where people try to change it, perhaps even try to lower it from the default, which is 64K, and what they end up doing is increasing it by 1,000 times too much. Which is definitely not what they wanted, and potentially means that now the server can send you a lot more data that will allow to buffer in memory. So we're proposing to just add an analyzer that says that if you increase this value, you're probably doing things wrong, or you're in the 3 people who wants to do it, so you should suppress that warning.
I mean, I'll start with the question of how did we end up having a thing that had an implied unit of bytes that has an actual unit of kilobytes, and that didn't get encoded in its name?
I don't know if Steven remembers, but that predates me, so no clue.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Like, I feel like if API review had been told max respawn header's length unit was kilobytes and not bytes, we would have said length is not the right.
I see. This predates me on this stuff as well. This was like back in 2008 or something.
Sockets HTTP handler?
No, HTTP client handler.
Okay, so Sockets HTTP handler is used here as a specific handler instantiation. The property comes from the hierarchy.
It comes from it copied the same naming that was used on HTTP client handler, which has been around forever.
Right, and kept the unit. The same,
yeah, we didn't want someone
right.
setting it on HTTP client handler and replacing it with Sockets HTTP handler and having the unit change.
Okay, so this is from the original HTTP client side project that's now become mainstream thing. Okay. That was really me asking a process question of how did we miss something
We weren't involved.
bad.
That's the short answer.
Right. That answers that. So the idea is just to warn and send somebody to the docs page that says this might be way bigger than you expected, and if they really meant yes because they're talking to themselves and for some reason are passing a 3 megabyte credential in a header, that then they suppress it, and otherwise we make them do the math themselves? Or are we also proposing a fixer that does div 1024?
I would propose only an analyzer. I don't. If you really want to change it, you can. I looked through GitHub when I filed this issue. The only uses were either lowering the limit, or it was our test that makes sure that this property still works and raises it. So I think it's going to be rare enough for people who actually want to do it that they can suppress it.
Okay, well then I guess the counter question would be, do enough people do this that it's worth the cost of having another analyzer? Whatever low value of incremental cost that is. Like, do people actually set it? Because if not, then we have an analyzer that runs to find out, no, I wasn't relevant, and it just slows down every compile by, 0.01 seconds or whatever.
This came about when someone filed an issue that we're overflowing because we weren't even expecting people to set it that high. And we fixed that. But so some people definitely are setting it.
Okay.
There's like one issue a year maybe I see, so it's not super common. I don't think it's like a must-have priority for us. It's still in future.
All right. The hardest part of any analyzer, category and level.
If reliability is the closest one we have to correctness, then reliability and level is probably info. I don't think we can be 100% certain of our heuristic that it's definitely wrong.
Let's see here. Design. The design is bad, but that wasn't the caller's problem. Maintainability. Usage?
Maybe usage.
Yeah. Do
Also makes me
people in
wonder if we want
practice-
to make the previous one we said reliability be usage.
Sure. Do people in practice tend to turn on our analyzers that are marked as info? You said it shows up in the IDE, but does it show up in like builds?
No, so it shows up. So there are multiple questions there. So first, it shows up in the IDE as a blue squiggle in the code, and then also in the errors window. There's 3 tabs. There's one for errors, one for warnings, and one for suggestions. And so it shows up under suggestions. As for do people tend to change those? Yes. In fact, we make it a little bit too easy to en masse change the default level of everything to warning. There's currently a setting you put into the CS proj that's like analyzer level, and there's a recommended, like the word recommended, which actually bumps like everything up, everything. So there's a decent number of times we see people en masse bumping everything up, even ones that we don't necessarily still believe in. And then you can do so individually. I've seen less people do that than just use one of those built-in things to say turn everything on. With .NET extensions, there's also some tooling that has some kind of more opinionated groupings of things to enable for cloud native, and so it will turn on certain things, groups of things beyond the default.
Got it. The context behind all of this is I'm wondering if I should also take this to the CodeQL team.
I see.
And have them make a CodeQL rule for it.
There's no way with CodeQL of just like inheriting Roslyn analyzers?
No, they're completely separate systems.
That's unfortunate.
I think CodeQL is basically a giant regex instead of an actual syntax tree looker. Yes, looker.
No, CodeQL follows syntax trees. Like it actually parses the logic.
Fancier than I gave it credit for. Yeah, so looking at the things that are in the category reliability, we have things like you awaited a value task twice, the universe might implode. And you called buffer.blockCopy and passed array.length, but your array is not of size 1, and that's not what buffer.blockCopy does. So they're mostly like you're going to destroy your process. So they for the most part seem to be like bad things are going to happen. Okay, the first rule actually in it is like you should dispose things, which is a little less, sometimes less critical, but sometimes for things like HTTP request message are super critical. And usage seems to be much more foofy. So I think this is probably more usage than reliability. And that we should change the one for throw if null on a struct to be usage. Sounds like the eyes have it. Alright. So usage info unless someone objects.
And we don't want the level to be warning.
I mean, do you think it justifies warning? If somebody's currently passing in the 16 meg, do you want that to show up in their command line build, possibly failing the build because they're one of the many people who set warn as error? If yes, then warning is fine.
We try and keep things that are warning that we're like very positive are wrong, and I don't know that we can be positive this is wrong.
Yeah, I would hope that the number of cases where people like are setting it higher correctly is basically none. But even if they are, it's not the end of the world. It's more memory. So the info's probably fine then.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm looking through a bunch of other uses as well, and I don't see strong evidence that people are doing this en masse incorrectly.
Hey, that worked. Alright, so returning to argument null exception throw if null. I think usage seems more appropriate there given what's actually in those categories. Does anyone want to agree or disagree?
That's okay. Yeah, because I guess reliability would be, like Steve said earlier, it's going to crash your application. And this isn't going to crash, it's just nonsensical.
Right, and especially because the cases where we're going to give a warning, we're giving a warning of you're making the JIT just delete your line of code. So
Yeah.
it is not a, your process might be doing a bad thing here. Alright.
So I am actually okay. So I've expanded my search, and I am actually finding some cases where people are hard coding these numbers to stupidly high values.
Enough cases, and you think that they're getting it wrong, that you want to change your mind on info and suggest warning was the right answer?
I don't know if I don't think people just run these in practice anyway. That's the thing, because like the types of errors that I see people making are errors that our analyzers would have caught anyway. Things like you have an off by one error in this method call. So I'm going to spin up a side email thread then with a few of you in the CodeQL team and just say like, hey, consider this, because I'm seeing enough matches to be concerned.
Okay, but you don't want to change it off of usage/info.
No.
Okay. Add support for date only and time only in try-parse of UTF-8 parser. 53768.
I thought we were not going to do this one.
Yeah, so this is one where we just need to officialize the decision of we're not going to do this because the plan is to use UTF-8 parsable or IUTF-8 span parsable moving forward. The minor nuance with date, time, and time only in particular is that UTF-8 parser has the behavior where it treats any invalid character as end of string rather than as invalid string. For the numeric types, we approved the new number styles option. Date, time, and time span are not number types, and they do not take a number styles option, so they do not have an equivalent way of specifying treat invalid characters end of string. So there's still a little bit of a nuance of, do we want to expose these on UTF-8 parser, or do we want to come up with some way to specify that parsing semantic for other types?
I mean, would that just be adding an overload that takes the sub-object of globalization that date time would care about? Or
It's
am I
not
completely
a
misunderstanding?
globalization thing. It's not a globalization thing. It's a parsing option, and we only have parsing options for numbers for number types today.
Right, but I guess date time has. I thought it took a culture object or a slice off a culture object, but like date time triparse has, especially triparse exact has 700 million options, and if like date only or time only need those, then it could adhere to the interface and then also add the overloads that have all the other options.
Okay.
But I think that, what I see in this issue, and unless we're trying to redirect it to something else, is add it to UTF-8 parser, and what we said with 81500 is we're done putting things on the central types, we're moving things to the types themselves. And so we would say no here, and then if somebody wants the extra parsing options that datetime.tryParseExact has on date only or time only, then we just make overloads of tryparse on those types. Yes?
That makes sense to me. So the decision is effectively officializing we're not going to be versioning UTF-8 parser moving forward. Number styles have the new option, whatever we called it, and other types like datetime will plan on adding overloads or relevant options to their existing option set if they have it to achieve the same functionality.
Right. Because this, which doesn't actually have a proposal in the top, has the suggestion of methods it would like to call, which was just the option less text goes in, value comes out. And I think that's just already covered with the 81500. There's no one. At least I think. Let's drag this over in. I don't know if the check marks here meant it's been done or not, or if it's been proposed or not. Because in 81500 we basically said all of our built-in types that are I span formatable parsable should be IUTF-8 span formatable parsable.
Right.
And then I don't know what the check marks mean here in the issue.
It means implemented. So the ones that aren't checked won't have the parsing or formatting support for net 8, just because time constraints.
Fair enough. But okay, so the exact thing they were proposing here is covered with this issue of the blanket. We'll do all the formatable things. The fact that there's a check mark or an unchecked box means it was basically API approved, just hasn't been implemented yet. So. Oh, sorry. The question I did have here is: is UTF-8 parser in a NuGet package that is net standard 2.0 that we're still updating, and then this is effectively a request for adding this functionality to net standard 2.0? Because if it's only net forward, I think closing is the right answer. And if it is net standard relevant, then there may be room for discussion.
We don't ship date only and time only for net standard, do we?
Don't we?
UTF parser is in system private core lib, it looks like, anyway.
And date only is net 6 plus. Okay.
Yeah, we never shipped a down level version.
Does this mean that UTF-8 parser is getting no new APIs? Or is it just
The
like try
intent
parse?
is with the addition of IUTF-8 span formatable and IUTF-8 span parsable, UTF-8 formatter and UTF-8 parser are effectively legacy. UTF-8 formatter now, I think all or almost all of the APIs now just direct into the corresponding functionality and the type, so we've deduped them. I think we'll end up doing the same on UTF-8 parser once the relevant functionality has fully been implemented.
long-winded version of closed C81500. Oh, that just changes the. Didn't actually do it. Not approved. That was the whole point. Alright. Is Authentication Manager obsolete? 77459. That's a question.
Mina, is this you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember. As far as I recall, these methods already just all no-op. So the fact that it's not obsolete can be misleading.
Is everything on it static?
Don't know on top of my head.
Looks that way, and there's a private constructor,
Yeah.
even though the class itself isn't static.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know why the class itself
throws
wasn't
null
declared
ref-
static.
It throws null argument exceptions. No, yeah. Probably should obsolete it.
Yeah. So, because when I looked at it, here it says class and not static class. It's like, well, see, also putting obsolete on the whole type is annoying. But if it's only a collection of static methods, then that doesn't really apply. So
There's also static state, but yeah. Well, I guess not really. There's just static properties. There's a string dictionary.
yeah, I mean there is static state, but everything on it is static. It's never going to appear in a method signature or member signature, which is generally the reason that I'm hesitant to put obsolete on a type itself. So
Yeah, the only thing I could see is maybe if someone was using the custom target name dictionary themselves, but I doubt it.
Well, so WPF uses credential policy, and I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah, I'm seeing some references to the custom target name dictionary in mono. And not much else.
Given that the rest of the type does nothing, like those references honestly probably should be removed.
Yeah.
So I would, that puts me in favor of obsoleting the type itself so that we flow those errors throughout the rest of the stack.
Agreed.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we don't seem to be using either of those properties internally anywhere.
Yeah, because I'm going backward through the WPF code right now, and like they ensure that their credential policy is put on the static authentication manager. But given that no one ever looks at authentication manager, like they probably need to reconsider why they do that. Because their code doesn't do what they think it does.
no, actually just system.net.
System.net.request. Interesting. Forgot that package existed.
The string could probably use some work. I don't remember if we care about that in this meeting or if that just gets dealt with during code review.
You mean the message?
Yeah.
It seems like a code review thing.
Oh, and yeah, did we mean actually syslib9? Are we recycling an existing error code?
We should probably just recycle it, yeah.
Yep.
So we'll also want to update the warning message and the page that it links to. Easy enough. It's just work.
All right. Any other feedback? Done.
Thank you.
And thank you, Philip, for asking the diagnostic ID question. Wow, we're just burning through these. JSON serializer options use 0 byte reads 77935. I feel like I recently saw an issue where somebody was upset that something was doing 0 byte reads when they didn't want it to.
So it looks like Miha opened this.
Right. Yeah, so 0 byte reads is an optimization thing that streams can do now, or for a while, but some take advantage of it, some don't, where you can call read async, give it an empty buffer, and it will just wait there, block until it actually has some data to give you. This means that you can defer allocating buffers or pinning stuff. It can help a lot with memory usage, especially if you have a ton of these happening at the same time. In this case, the APIs for the HTTP client JSON extensions were just approved for the streaming ones. So you do like get from JSON enumerable thing. So that might be a very long running operation where you just read data forever from a server. And in that case, you might want to use less memory while you wait for data to arrive. And with this flag, we could tell the JSON serializer to read with 0 byte reads first to reduce its memory usage.
What runtimes, in what runtimes did our streams start supporting this? Because I see a comment in there regarding HTTP client as of .NET 7. Were there things in .NET 6 that supported this?
I think SSL, I don't remember, was it 6 where SSL stream started actually propagating and making use of 0 byte reads if you called it with a 0 byte read?
I feel like that was your initiative, Steve. Was that 5, 6, or 7?
I mean, we've been doing this. I thought we've been doing this in some places even before that, but we made a big push for it, I believe, around 6, and then we increased it in 7, and now further in 8 as well. I'm not 100% certain in what I just said, but I believe that's the case.
Right. So you have the same nebulous 3-year zone that I do in my head.
I feel like it might have even been before, like .NET 5 or maybe even 3.0.
Okay. So the system text JSON package also targets netfx 462 and netstandard 2.0. Should this property exist on those targets?
in general, for well-behaved streams, there's no problem doing 0-byte reads. It may not help, but it shouldn't hurt. Because there's two behaviors that are valid for a stream when it encounters a request for 0 bytes. Either it can return immediately, it returns 0 immediately, or it can return 0 after waiting for there to be data available. And either way, issuing a read against such a stream, even if it just returns immediately, the worst that you've done is you've made one additional call, and then you always follow it up with a real call to get the data. So it may not help, but it generally shouldn't hurt if the stream has been implemented correctly.
Yeah, I mean the big concern, and I think, and I saw an issue pop up recently that had hit this, is if you make your own wrapper stream type and you take the easy assumption of if read returns 0, it means you have hit end of stream and can dispose your underlying stream, except that's only true if
you never pass in 0.
If 0 was not the biggest number it was allowed to return.
Right.
So it's an edge case that's been hanging there for forever, and I think Steve's been trying to push more things doing a block on, or a block for 0, so you can use it as a signal if data is ready.
Yeah, but I sent a PR this morning to improve the docs here, because the docs only talked about what to do in the case where non-0 was requested, and it never talked about the case for when 0 was requested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll say on this one, I think the only thing that we can do as on this group with this right now is say that we would want to not add it. If we want to add it, I think we need people from JSON here, because I would ask how it impacts the code gen. Like, do they need a code gen option? Is it the same option? Should it be different defaults? So I don't think we can say yes. So unless somebody wants to make a strong case for no, I think we just skip this one.
I agree.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that this is valuable to have, but we need the right people here to make sure that it's the right shape for everything. That's kind of what you were getting at, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, well, in particular, we now have this weird relationship between JSON serializer options and the JSON generated thingy attribute, and would want someone representing JSON to say if we're doing the right thing there. Right. So next is provide Enumerable of T support for memory of T, 2, 3, 9, or 5, 0. I don't know this could be done without making Christoph Swalina very sad.
Really, he was opposed to it?
Well, he believes that no method should invoke memory.span more than once. And this would have to invoke memory.span every time you move next. Sorry, every time.
Every time
you move
it wouldn't have to, only if you wrapped something that wasn't known to us.
It could ask if it's a sneaky array and not need to do those complicated things, yes.
I mean, we already have that functionality, but we have Go ahead, Tanner.
I was just going to say we could, it would only have to do that in the case that it was calling the non-value enumerator. We can implement Enumerable, have it have the regular pattern that boxes, and then we can have a ref struct value enumerator that caches the underlying span.
Well, if we implement the enumerable pattern with a ref struct, then you presumably would get a awkward warning if you used it in an async method that you can't use a ref struct, and you're like, I called for each. I mean, yeah, you're like, I just wrote a for each. Where's this ref struct appearing? It's like, well, welcome to how the language actually works. So I don't know that we would want to make a ref struct enumerator. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the answer would be in an async method, cast it to non-generic enumerable. But, ew.
So what does our toEnumerable method do today? Today it yield return memory.span of I, right?
Yeah, I mean we can certainly improve that.
Yeah, so just my instinct says that providing enumerable of t support to memory of t is basically the same as adding an indexer. And I remember Christoph being strongly opinionated that it should not have an indexer.
Right, because
At the same time, one of the most common complaints I see about memory of T is that it's basically not friendly and not usable.
yeah.
Like, it seems like there should be a balance between making it nice to use and then having the perf analyzer that says you probably want to cache your span instead of using the indexer.
The proposed API is to have a toEnumerable method as opposed to implementing enumerable directly, right?
We already have a toEnumerable method.
Yeah, it's on memory marshal.
Yeah.
But this proposed API is making it an extension method so people don't need to use memory marshal.
Oh, I thought it was actually making it implement enumerable. Is that not what's being proposed?
That's actually what I thought was proposed, but then I scrolled down to see what the proposal says, which is to add a toEnumerable extension method.
As opposed to calling the static method on memory marshal?
I mean, we say that any type that has the word marshal in it is equivalent to the type name being unsafe, and so this is Tanner's friendliness thing of if we've put it on memory marshal, we've said this is dangerous, don't do it. And if it's a friendly extension method, then it says this is fine, do it.
I mean, this does have, if I squint, I can kind of half claim that this is dangerous, but like in typical use cases, it's not going to be. Like what you would have to do is you would have to capture the memory of T into an enumerable and then somehow allow the original memory to be reclaimed while still holding on to the enumerable. Like it could happen, but you have to go out of your way to do it.
Well, if the enumerable holds the memory, it seems like it would still be fine. It's when it goes through and tries doing fancy cheating things that now you get you held an enumerable and let the memory get unpinned, but we cheated but we've already run through and are holding the pointer to where we know should be next. That's when it gets bad.
It's not like a pinning or GC thing. It's more like the underlying memory manager could have been, somebody literally could have called dispose on it, like in the middle of you enumerating it. Like what happens at that point?
Right. I mean, the same thing that would happen if you held it in a field of your own type and let it flow back and the memory manager freed it.
Yeah. Like depending on where the freeing operation takes place, like you could dereference unallocated memory, which whatever.
But again,
it's a weird edge case.
Could do that anywhere else.
the other thing is that if we did want to make this more optimal than just like yield return memory of span.i or memory.span of I, like our toEnumerable method would probably say like, oh, I know that this is wrapping an array, so let me return the array directly as an IEnumerable of t, or slice it however you need to. Maybe you return the array segment as an IEnumerable of t. Like at that point, you can now cast it back to something that gives you access to the original array, which is an unsafe operation.
Does it
Because
violate
you
the
now
slice?
have, well, it could violate the slice and it could violate the read-onlyness of it.
Well, right now it's only proposed on writable memory. I assume we would
Yeah.
do it symmetrically after. I mean, it could still return an opaque enumerator over the array, that it just picks one that knows it's an array.
Is it required that when you're done enumerating an IEnumerable, you call dispose on it, assuming it exposes the dispose method?
I mean, the language will if you use it in a for each.
Yeah.
The rule of idisposable, calling dispose is never supposed to be required. If it's supposed to be required, you're supposed to have a finalizer. Also, don't have a finalizer. So, so like if somebody's manually calling .move next and current, I don't think we would say you have a correctness problem if you don't call dispose. Which means that the dispose on this shouldn't do a pin and dispose do unpin. If it's going to do that, it would need a finalizer. So does anybody have feelings?
Yeah, because I'm looking at implementations where within .NET itself, like within the DCL, within our extended libraries, we call getEnumerator and move next manually, and very few of those cases actually ever call dispose or have things in the using block.
Mm-hmm.
We assume that there's no dispose on it, or that dispose no ops, which is unfortunate. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it impacts our ability to safely provide some opaque implementation over things like a memory manager.
Right. I mean, could use a finalizer, but that feels toEnumerable doesn't feel like a thing that should be enqueuing something for finalization.
Yes.
I mean, we can also skip this one and say we want, because Eric, I looked to see who marked it as ready for review, and that was Eric, unless it's actually Eric T. And if none of us have strong opinions, we can defer to let the area owner talk it up and down.
I guess my immediate question is like, why is memory marshal.toEnumerable not good enough for these scenarios? Like the API exists, it's existed since Net Standard 2.0, or it exists in a Net Standard 2.0 compliant package. Like, is it usable for people?
I mean, so do we want to say that and bounce it back to Eric, or just skip it?
I would say that and bounce it back. Like, what value are we adding by duplicating an API that already exists? If there maybe the answer will be like there's a large number of people clamoring for this and they don't want to use memory marshal for it because it has unsafe, connotations. But there's no evidence of that presented in this issue.
I'm just looking to see if the memory marshal version ever got mentioned in here. It's got closed in 2018.
There was a suggestion from Ian way back when that the API should maybe live in memory marshal. But that's the only reference to memory marshal that's relevant.
I mean, I could just guess that it's like less discoverable if I don't like care about perk and I just want to like assert collection in my test on memory, then
yeah,
this
and
would
I
make
could
that
like
work.
if read-only memory of T like implements Enumerable directly, then maybe that would start working more nicely, but that's not what's being proposed here.
Because it's memory and not read-only memory.
Well, because
Sure.
what's being proposed is an extension method to turn it into an Enumerable.
Oh, okay. Whoops.
Which already exists, just not a new extension method form.
Okay. Extension methods are like a little more discoverable than like poking around in memory marshal, but yeah, it's not
Well,
as discoverable as just implementing it, which could be worse in some respects, I guess.
Right.
Well, that also harkens back to what was said earlier about like we very intentionally did not want this type to be used in that scenario.
Right. Is it somebody's arguing discoverability, and then we get to argue, can we make it friendly and safe in a general enough thing, or is it somebody's like, this functionality should exist, and then the answer is it does.
Yeah.
So. And does anybody have any faith that they have a 5-minute issue?
We made amazing progress today for a meeting that we almost canceled. Maybe we can call it a win in a day.
Yeah. This is the full extent of the ability to scroll. Like, I can only jiggle. We're one issue away from... Well, here, I'll just zoom out. Ta-da!
Or we could extend the meeting by half an hour in zero bounce.
And I just removed the top one from API ready for review anyway, so minus
You didn't
one
even need to
there.
scroll out.
Oh, I see that. Yeah. You can go back to 100%, Jeremy. Oh, it looks like you did.
I did. So there you go. All right. Since nobody has faith that they have a 5-minute issue, I agree with Steve's motion that we adjourn early and call it a win that we have gotten the backlog down to fits on one screen. So,
Hooray!
thank you all for joining us. Sorry we started late. As you saw, we had not a huge number of participants, and we didn't all show up at the same time. So, yeah, see you all on, or at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Except, let's be honest, we really mean like 10:07. And yeah, bis bald.